program. Membership was only enabled for national governments, and for the last 2 years, we have had a Pioneers program for subnational governments, where we have the participation of provinces and cities that try to implement open government policies at the local level. This is a pioneering program, and based on its good results, it has been renewed and extended for another 2 years. So on this panel, we will have the opportunity to have a discussion and listen to the experience of these three pioneer states, La Libertad in Peru, Jalisco in Mexico, and Buenos Aires in Argentina. And we will try to understand which were the challenges they faced, the findings, and the lessons learned. On behalf of Buenos Aires, we have Maricel Lonati from the city government, together with Maria Soledad Gattoni, who is a researcher into the independent reporting mechanism. This is an assessment and evaluation office within the OGP that focuses on assessing the impact achieved by the members of this program through their action plans. Also, on behalf of Jalisco, we have with us Stephen Burswhistle, and Claudia Patricia Arteaga, and I'm missing one, Edgar Ruban. And on behalf of La Libertad in Peru, we have Carlos Enrique Chunga Montero and Jorge Morel and Hugh Romero Ruiz. Am I missing anyone? Okay, so let's begin. We have, as I said, representatives of the governments, of the civil society of each of these cities, and the independent reporting mechanism, the IRM, according to the acronym in English. I'm going to begin with a question for the governments. The Subnational Pioneers program of the OGP has the mission of reaching out to the local level, and it attaches relevance to open government policies because local governments have contact with citizens. I am a representative of the local government in the city of Buenos Aires, so I know about that. So how can we translate that proximity with people into open government commitments that we include in our action plan? So the question for each of the government representatives is what you did in order to capture the citizens' demands, what were the challenges that you faced, what you can share with us about that. We have a lot of representatives here on stage, so you will have 2 or 3 minutes for a few comments, and then we will have a second round. Carlos, do you want to start? Good morning. Well, in relation to the initiatives in La Libertad, the fact of incorporating civil society was very important. So we started working, making a call for the projects that we already had in the government. So we started making a call for citizens' participation, and through workshops, through induction days, and through training also for government officials on open government, we were able to incorporate 4 commitments in La Libertad government. We used training and guidance methodologies based on the OGP recommendations for the subscription guidelines. So basically, the 4 commitments were evaluated by the civil society. They came up with those commitments because there was a call to all the regional management offices to come up with projects in order to decide which ones would end up being in the plan. So we established a prioritization process. So we have citizenship security commitment. We also have another commitment related to the rural sector, another one related to water, and another commitment that relates to labor laws. And in those 4 commitments, we have worked closely together with the steering committees and the civil societies that they have working hand in hand with the management offices. These are consultative bodies. So the formulation and development of the commitments have them all involved. So there was a proposal made initially, and they are working with us to make sure that we combine all those commitments successfully in December. What about the experience in Jalisco? Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. It is my pleasure to be here with you. I should say that in Jalisco, citizenship participation was very active. The technical secretariat was set up with 9 full members and substitutes and liaisons, and 50% of the members come from the civil society. We have representatives of universities, companies, and technical institutions. So that made it easier for us to look for the tools that would enable us to bring these proposals closer to society. At the same time, we did work for 6 months that could be summarized in 4 important time points. And the initial phase, the climax, that was the most intense phase, and then the completion part to come up with an action plan. We also established dialogue tables on 6 themes: poverty and inequality, public services, human rights, gender equality, fight against corruption, and natural resources governance. So that was the starting point, and we work on a broad basis. So we started by the most general aspects, and then we went into the more particular. At a second point in time, we included an electronic consultation process through which people could participate, state their needs, the problems they were facing, and propose solutions. That was not enough. We had significant participation, but the third point in time was important when we reached that peak, that climax. We expanded this consultation, and we received approximately 3,000 proposals. They were massively disseminated because we realized that we needed to disseminate this in the metropolitan area of Guadalajara, but we should also reach out to other areas where there were big needs and deficiencies. So with the involvement of all the members of the Secretariat, we organized some awareness-raising visits through missions. We had meetings with municipal representatives also in the parks, in the different municipalities. We had meetings. We also work through radio and television stations, the print media, and we also resorted to the support of some foundations and some trade associations. And through all these efforts, we were able to obtain 3,000 proposals that later on were grouped based on the themes they addressed, and this reinforced the formulation of commitments because we identify the relevant factors, and we organize a meeting with experts to verify the feasibility, the relevance of the different problems, the cost associated, and other criteria that help us finalize the commitments. And now Jalisco has 7 commitments in place, and all of them are well underway. Thank you. In the case of Buenos Aires, what can you tell us? Good morning. As cities say, the proposal of OGP of establishing plans through co-creation is the first step that the city of Buenos Aires took in order to come up with the commitments. Initially, in the city of Buenos Aires, we talked about co-management. So the government and the civil society are on an equal footing managing this plan. We also organize a theme-based tables in order to come up with institutional agendas for the government and for the civil society to discuss the most relevant issues for citizens and to address those issues for which open government could have some answers. We had 5 commitments, one related to open state that involves the city government, the judiciary, and the legislative branches of government and the city. Also public services. Once again, here we have the involvement of the citizenship. And this is what we like the most, because in the commitments we were able to include also this participation component. Because in all these commitments, we also included some feedback, citizen feedback mechanisms. Some of them have already been set up, others are still being finalized. We are trying to define which will be the ideal tool for that feedback, but here we talk about open information, platforms to have information on infrastructure works, and in addition to that, we have this participatory component, because it will be the citizens themselves who will be able to rate the type of information posted there, if it is updated, if what they see in reality matches the information that is published there, or there is a commitment on reproductive and sexual health. And we have a platform with all the services available in the city, so they will be able to rate the services, also to ask for a reply from the government. And in that way, we can close this feedback loop, where we do not only open it up for information, but also allow citizens to take a leading role by helping us improve on those commitments so that they will not be static, they will be dynamic. Okay, thank you. Now, a question for the representatives of civil society. Here we are talking about commitments that have not been undertaken necessarily by the cities. Formally, they have, but these are commitments that we are co-created with the civil society. So we are co-owners of these commitments and these action plans. In each of your cities, what was the experience like? The government representatives have told us about the strategies and the practices used to reach out to citizens and to capture social demands. As representatives of civil society, what is it that you can tell us about these processes? Which were the challenges that you identify for the future? Let's start with Peru. Good morning. I feel well. I feel very happy to have been invited to participate in this meeting in Argentina. I bring greetings from the César Vallejo University in La Libertad. We had been invited by the civil society, together with other universities, to implement and to apply these commitments. We were invited to a session. I have a presentation here to share with you. This is the commitment on citizen and participatory security. We were invited and we were told, we need you to deal with one of these commitments. Usually they relate to applications, software apps, and so we made those apps available. And this is the commitment related to security, and here there is a question, where is the crime? So we listed the basic requirements for this app. So we started developing the app. According to open government criteria, we had to focus on the design and the development of the app in order to start complying with this commitment. I recall that we participated in 16 or 17 meetings to collect information, to gather data, and to adjust the requirements. We ended up having a mobile app. So the name of the app is ¿Dónde está el delito? Where is the crime? And this will be a mobile app that can be freely downloaded in order to prevent the crimes and also to reduce the consequences of crimes. Here we have the logo of the police forces in our country. In order to develop this app, we needed to be in agreement with the National Police Force. So we invited the officers, the authorities of the police, and the regional chief of police, who is the right person to coordinate this kind of work, because the app would go beyond the idea of being just a simple app. It required coordination with the law enforcement. Okay, let me explain this to you because it seems that the slides are not moving forward. The idea underlying this app is that this should be used by citizens and by law enforcement agencies in order to come up with a local crime map. The pilot test will be applicable to the Trujillo, that location, but the plan is to extend it to the entire region and then to the entire country. So we require coordination with the local civilian authorities and the law enforcement authorities. We have made progress and we are already at 70% of this project. We are ready now for delivering this app to the Development Office for Open Government. This has been a very interesting experience. So we worked with a team of developers in the university, and I'm also part of that team. Okay, thank you. What about Jalisco?
I know you, Stephen, are a critical and vibrant voice, so people who are just awake, we expect a powerful voice. Okay, the state of Jalisco is a large, heterogeneous state, and there are significant challenges to channel citizen demands. We have indigenous populations in the north, on the coastal region, and an area that is highly urbanized, Guadalajara, with a few million inhabitants. And we didn't want to have another governmental agenda, another thing in the checklist of the government. So we contacted the people. This organization provides services to vulnerable people. We do not have large think tanks. So this civil society knows what are the needs of its population. So from the government, we were keen on having an agenda that should be restricted and developed by the people. And Sociedad Civil, this organization, had to be the bridge. As Claudia said, we organized several events to reach the people. As I said before, it was not a state, it was a city. So our challenge was to go beyond the borders of the city, to contact the people. Mexico, in general, in the area of Jalisco, there is a feeling of opposition with the government because we feel that they could fail us. And this platform was an occasion for reconnecting with the government and put on the table the interests and the needs of the people. Even though we know that open government is not a miracle solution, it could help us improve certain things in very specific matters. So, at the beginning, our challenge was to explain to the people what open government was. They said, I do not want transparency, because this is what I heard in Mexico. What is it that we have to make transparent? Open government is not just transparency. So the first challenge is to explain what this concept meant, because this is not something that we were able to convey on a global basis. What is the difference and what is the contribution that open government makes? So bringing civil society and the people to the table, people were saying, I have things to do. What am I going to do here? What is that we intend to achieve here? So civil society and the organization had to go to other regions to find regional partners in the state of Jalisco. And we started socializing the concept and all the benefits that open government could bring to the people, because that is what we're talking about. It is not a state development plan, but an action plan, the purpose of which should be to improve the people's quality of life and not just have platforms and very beautiful, very pretty tools, but which change nothing on the people's daily lives. So along these lines, we started disseminating this concept, and we started socializing the significance of participating. And we were telling the people, well, if you do not participate, you're not entitled to criticize. Government is not perfect, it has its limits, but there is a will. And if we, as citizens and comprehensively as a civil society, if we do not participate, we're not entitled to criticize. So that was a major challenge we faced in the creation of the action plan. Thank you very much. We also have with us 3 representatives from the independent reporting mechanism. Civil society and government submit their action plans. There comes the implementation stage, and we can say we are all happy until the evaluators arrive, and they have a comprehensive view of the processes. You have a unique position here because you can talk to all actors, to all players in a reserved manner with a critical view. You have access to all information that record the processes and show how the commitments are working, are operating. So let's start with Buenos Aires. What is your view on these processes, which have been a novelty? It's the first time that they are implemented at a subnational level. So a couple of comments, a general view on the process. And also let us know if you've found any commitment where the relationship between civil society and government was either positive or negative. Good morning. Thank you, Alvaro, for your questions. First, let me start by telling you that the various subnational entities are still in the process of implementing their action plans. This implementation will take place until December 31st. And let me make a commercial here. You can visit the webpage of the OGP, where the independent reporting mechanism has already published the first progress report evaluating the co-creation process of the action plan for the city of Buenos Aires and a first approach of the language of the commitments. This version will be available until December the 5th, and we hope you comment on them so we can strengthen the action plan and provide suggestions for implementation and further evaluation. In addition to that, let me refer to 3 salient aspects of the co-creation process in the Buenos Aires Action Plan development. First of all, Alvaro, you were saying that we have access to virtually privileged information because we can talk to all players, and that is true. And I was surprised when I interviewed civil society and government actors. From different perspectives, all said that they had wasted a lot of time in the design of the methodology for the co-creation process, that it had taken several months to come to an agreement and to establish a methodology for governance and define a process for the consultation of the first action plan. And rather than considering this a waste of time, in my opinion, I think this was an investment, months that were earned. This process of defining the working methodology and governance was very important for the creation of a plan which, for the independent review mechanism, is quite ambitious. It has 3 out of 5 commitments that have a transformative power, which means that if they are to be implemented, they will have a significant impact in transforming the citizens' lives. And this plan has went beyond data opening, going into concrete themes such as education, sexual and reproductive education, and transportation. Then I'd like to talk about the process of documentation of the entire co-creation process. In the working group, which is the Buenos Aires multi-sectoral group, there was a very thorough recording of all minutes of the meetings. There is a tracking dashboard for the commitments, and this for the IRM researcher and the various agencies involved in the co-creation process is very important, because there is a record that is a proof of what has been done in the process. And then finally, one of the challenges and most interesting aspects is the inclusion of civil society organizations. They are joining not just in the co-creation development process, but as co-executors of the process. And this poses both challenges and opportunities. One of the most interesting commitments, in my view, is the sexual and reproductive education commitment, where the City of Buenos Aires has been working together with the Westbed Foundation in the implementation of an online platform. And this is a step forward. It means going beyond the co-creation process towards co-implementation. And this requires, or this represents, an interest in coordination among civil society organizations for the monitoring of the process. Thank you. Edgar, what about Jalisco? Thank you. With regard to your questions, let me make first a general comment and say that in order to have all these mechanisms implemented, we first need to meet certain prerequisites. Getting closer to people is not as easy as it looks. I think this is a process where you should first meet some minimum standards. And let me say in that respect that the government first should have the will to give power, a will to lose control. And this requires a change of paradigm, a change in the way of doing things. This is not a recipe that you can copy and paste. Each government has its own peculiarities, and it's not this easy to say, okay, this is a good practice, copy it and replicate it. No, it is good to copy practices, but they must be adapted to be successful. So that is one of the prerequisites. a will to deliver, to surrender the power that is typically co-opted by public administration in decision-making and surrender it. Likewise, these people, these persons that are going to give in their power should be trained. The public servant that is to be getting closer to the people should be trained and made, and he has to understand that this is a process. It's not just implementing mechanisms and dialogue. If these people has not internalized and assimilated what open government means, what are the consequences and the degree of implication and how the information is to be processed for the decision to be adopted and then become a government public policy, it will not be successful. We see many practices at present, but very little talk about the barriers they had to overcome before success. So I would stress that aspect of training as very important. Another important thing is that the administrations involved should institutionalize open government from the inside, from their interior. Within their limitations, public administrations should have a unit, an area, thinking about this and disseminating the concept across the institution. They typically understand what public policies, participation, and transparency means, but it's just one area in several public administration agencies. And if the others do not understand, you will not be successful. If you do not involve the various other areas, if they do not understand or are not interested in open government, even though you have one empowered unit, you will not be able to realize open government. So the creation of collaboration spaces in the city with increasingly hybrid citizens, with both digital mechanisms and face-to-face tools that will help create the co-production networks where there will be a flow of ideas and projects from the citizens. And that is why we should promote and boost the appropriation of technology. Governments should set up mechanisms to connect people through technology. There are barriers, the digital divide, and so on. However, to set up a network for the citizens' connection, mechanisms should be implemented. At present, there is a lot of talking about open data. Well, such open data should not only come from the government side, but the government should also have a platform to receive open data fed from the citizens so that they are also powerful data, data that are scrutinized and overseen by the citizens themselves. That is also important. So what we are now seeing in terms of good practices is not well armed. It should be assessed, and there should be an internal process in public administration. They have to buy it in. They should not just go for legitimization, but understand that this is not just a policy, but a way of understanding what government is.
Jorge, what about La Libertad in Peru? Like Maria Soledad said, I would like to invite you to have a look at the preliminary draft report for La Libertad. I know that perhaps if you want to know more about the internal policies of Peru and other levels of government, I invite you to have access to this document. Based on this report, I would like to refer to the three legs in this process to create the action plan for La Libertad. Let me begin by talking about the official and anecdotal evidence that we have regarding the commitments for the region. If you look at data on victimization and crime rates, in La Libertad, it is ranked sixth in the country. It is the sixth region with the highest crime rates, as reported by the police. And if you review the surveys and polls, you will see that 80% of the citizens in La Libertad feel insecure, or they feel that they may fall victim to a crime in the next few months. So in 2016, we realized that citizens attached a lot of importance to all these aspects. Secondly, I should say that the formulation of the action plan was based on the pre-existing participatory mechanisms. It's not just a matter of creating everything anew. So we used the already existing mechanisms. We already had a regional participation plan. We already had connections with civil society. Some of the organizations have been established for many years, like the one organization that is an umbrella organization for several organizations and fights against poverty and violence. So we resorted to those spaces and mechanisms that already existed, and we empowered them. This is good news, according to the civil society representatives we talked to. And the third leg in this process was that of the coordination of the action plan with the regional government management plans. This is very important because we are talking about governments that have certain objectives, certain limitations, established by laws that they haven't passed. So in the case of La Libertad, the efforts were made to establish this coordination with the annual plans and also with longer-term development plans. So we need to recognize the effort that was made in this regard. Now, going back to the Peruvian context, in the first few years of the 2000s, a lot of participatory mechanisms were established. But in 2006, we saw a turning point there because we found some contradiction between management and participation, because management would be more of a technical nature for those who have all that technical knowledge, and participation would be contrary to that. But in the specific case of La Libertad, we have been able to show that these two things can go hand in hand together, and that they are not necessarily opposed to each other. I would say that this has been sufficient, that this has been a good step forward. From the action plan perspective, it has been given a lot of momentum, but we still need to do some more work. The participatory mechanisms that worked well in the previous decade with the involvement of NGOs and other institutions were certainly legitimate, but we need to take another step to get the citizens involved through technology, to bring in people who do not necessarily participate in these institutionalized spaces in order to reach out to a broader audience. So in the future action plans, the stakeholders will need to take this into account, and I think that they will be able to reflect this properly. Thank you. All your comments are very rich and useful. Clearly, all these are intensive processes, establishing the connection with the civil society where this connection did not exist, transforming the culture within governments to change the government officials culture who now need to understand that in this context there is a different dynamics. This is a different way of working. So we are aiming here at a true co-creation process. So let me ask this to the government representatives here. What are the lessons that you learned in establishing this link with the civil society? What worked well and what didn't work so well and that you need to improve for next year? Yes, of course, we learned a lot of lessons. When the civil society was brought on board this process in the selection of projects, we were able to quickly identify the needs of citizens. In all the process selected by the citizens, all the regional management offices were able to include not only projects that would have an impact on the growth and development of the region, but also that would have a human side, a human dimension. So we realized that a very important factor in all these proposals was the quality of life. Anyway, although we have chosen 4, we still have a database with a lot of projects that may be included in a subsequent action plan. What happened in Jalisco? It took us 6 months to determine what methodology we were going to use and how we could approach the civil society. And already in our technical secretariat, we had some civil society representatives. But for the next action plan, we would have initially to focus on civil society sectors, the universities, or business associations that perhaps were not included in this process. This is to make sure that we involve all the partners, but also for them to feel that they can own the project so that they can fall in love with open government. And I believe that the most important aspect is dissemination, to be able to understand what open government means, get them involved, work together for public policies, not only with the social sector, because the social sector is always involved. There we have an audience that is truly committed to transparency. I come from little sector in Jalisco where we have deeply committed individuals, but we also need to reach out to other areas. And what is most difficult for us is to reach out to the regions. That is a key aspect that I think that we need to work on for the next action plan from the very beginning, based on the experience that we have had so far. So I think that we need to do that from the very beginning. Thank you. Buenos Aires? Fortunately, we have had a good dialogue, a good interaction with the civil society. We have discussed with them how we can improve our relationship, how we can improve planning and logistics to make sure that we can have a broader participation. But with the civil society organizations that are part of the working team and on the government side, all of us agree that we need to broaden participation. Most of the organizations following this process are more institutionalized organizations that are always present in the OGP processes at the national level and at the local level. So we all understand that in order to better understand the needs and the demands of citizens from a more local perspective, we need to reach out to grassroots organizations or organized citizens that have shared interests. And in order to do this, I agree with what was said here. We need to be able to convey the meaning of open government and how open government will provide concrete solutions to the needs of citizens, those living in certain neighborhoods and those that work in the city on a daily basis. And perhaps we need to focus more on what the city already has in place. Unlike the first plan that was formulated a year and a half ago, now we are at a point in time where we have made a lot of progress in terms of citizen participation. For the government, having a conversation with neighbors is something basic. We discuss about infrastructure works. We have different programs like BA, Elige. So we have a lot of institutionalized projects. And perhaps in the plan, for the next plan, we need to take advantage of these mechanisms that already exist, to use the tools that already exist and are working well, and try to identify the real needs of citizens and look for solutions, not only to identify their demands, but also to get them involved in the formulation of the commitments and hopefully the implementation of these commitments. So in this way, we can empower them and we can share the power with them. I have a question as a closing question for the civil society. In governments, usually we have more resources than civil society organizations. Usually, we have a greater institutional capacity because we have financial and human resources. And civil society organizations are under pressure because they need to participate, they need to attend meetings, they need to follow up on issues. And I have a background in civil society, and I know that resources are scarce. I know that NGOs and civil society organizations have to deal with a lot of obstacles when they get engaged in projects, and we do not always have the same level of tools available for working in this kind of process. In the next action plan, we will have a 2-year process until 2020. So what are the challenges that you envisage there? What things do you need to consider in the next 2 years from the civil society in order to ensure you can have the level of participation that you want in these processes? Stephen? That is a very good question. Yesterday, we received good news from the trust fund that probably will help the civil society, and I applaud the OGP for this initiative. But I think that we do not have a leveled playing field in Mexico. The government has a lot of resources, and the civil society in Jalisco has very scarce resources. But I work to secure funds, and whenever we need funds in civil society, we try to secure those funds through planning. If we sit down at the table with the government and we understand what the government needs, not only what the government is asking for, because the government might say, we are not doing well with this commitment, or this will be very difficult for us. I need civil society participation. There are donors in Mexico. There are international donors that can provide support through a project. A commitment, to me, is a project. So through the project, we can get funding. And this can level off these differences between the capacity for the government to implement and for us to do some oversight. I don't like the terms that refer to oversight, or when in English we say that the civil society organizations are watchdogs. I think that we need to work together more on the planning side. If in a year time I know what I will do with you, and I can tell a donor, for instance, you know, the government of Jalisco, the government of a certain location will need my help, and I have all the support to work, that is something that donors are looking for, because they can support co-creation and the search for solutions. And they can help this joint work between the government and the civil society. If we achieve that, I think that civil society will not only have access to trust funds or to resources from the government. The civil society will be able to work with corporate foundations, with private foundations, with other donors and development agencies that can provide that support. In Mexico, we have the Hewlett Foundation with an excellent practice that has provided a lot of support to civil society in the country. I don't know exactly how this collaboration was established, but at the federal level, the civil society had a significant advantage. And what about La Libertad? You come from an academic institution. Perhaps this is not the same as an NGO, but I'm interested in knowing your views. What was the experience of the academic institution in this process? When in La Libertad, we were invited to participate in open government. We didn't know initially the rules of the game, but it was anyway an interesting experience to see the civil society's links with other organizations. And we realized that we could participate, that we could have our opinion heard on topics related to citizen security. So at the university, we tried to identify the characteristics that the app that was going to be developed should have. So we collected information from all of them, and although we haven't completed the work, we are in the phase of providing a prototype to citizens and to enrich that prototype with the citizens' experience with that product. As I said, there are two sides to this product. One is the national police side, and the other side has to do with the fact that any citizen will be able to download this app in order to contribute to the information in that crime map. In general terms, we will have information on crimes or illicit activities, but the person reporting that situation would not be identified, so there would be anonymity to protect that whistleblower or that person reporting that crime. So in this way, the civil society joins the university through a number of parameters that we have established to develop this app to meet the needs of the population. As Jorge has already said, people are worried. This is the sixth most violent city in the country. We have deaths and murders every day. There is violence against women. And today we have parents worrying for their children, their girls. Children are missing every single day. And that is a very serious problem. We feel very well to be able to contribute to these projects on the university side. Somebody said that open government is still unknown to many. For us, this was something new, a novelty. And now we understand that there is much more than the original notion that we had of open government. So for our society, it's very important to be able to make this contribution. Thank you.
And the last final minutes before concluding, a question to all of you. Each of the participants of these pioneer subnational state programs are different. Cities like Seoul or Paris, large metropolis with a metropolitan size, with conurbations that poses major challenges in terms of public policies, but also smaller towns. I mean, they all have different priorities and challenges and different strategic needs. And oftentimes, what I see is that the action plans align with the major strategic needs or the political priorities. The commitments at a subnational level range from serious citizen security problems, efforts for better finance equality, reproductive and sexual education, and many more. We have a couple of minutes for each city. So who of you would represent to describe the strategic challenges for the next action plan? Which are the priorities or the channels you envisage will be the next action plan developed? Let's start with Buenos Aires. I guess we all agree in this panel on the importance of expanding participation for the upcoming action plans. And here we should reflect on how such larger participation will impact the governance fora or mechanisms of the subnational entities. In the city of Buenos Aires, in our government table, which is the multi-sectoral forum, that is to say, how the incorporation of new sectors will impact the governance mechanisms. That is a major challenge. Another challenge, which is shared by all subnational units, is on sustaining this synergy of collaboration and participation between civil society and governments during the implementation process. There is a significant productive synergy in the co-creation process in its vast majority, as shown by the preliminary results of the OGP. The co-creation processes are much more fruitful in terms of collaboration than implementation. So how to move forward to a collaboration synergy in implementation? That's another major challenge. And besides, and more specific to Buenos Aires, although the city has succeeded in establishing commitments and reporting mechanisms for which is central for contemporary cities, I think we should also think on how to close this feedback flow between civil society or citizens and the city, considering that the citizens should not only feed back on what the city provides, but also what the city is going to do, what the government is going to do with the contribution, with the inputs from the citizens, how this input is to be used to enhance and improve the public policy processes, and how will the government respond to the citizens because of the commitment it has taken on. Jalisco, the challenges, and let me be very specific and brief. One of the challenges is to embed open government into institutions, then train public servants and the government staff on open government. Third, create collaborative spaces for citizens to have a transparent and two-way communication with government through civil society, but also over platforms empowering the citizens as individuals. Then promote the use and appropriation of technological tools of a social application, then generate open data and platforms for enabling the citizens to create those open databases, learn from the experiences conducted in other governments. That's important, adapting them, not just copying them. And another major challenge to be faced by Jalisco next year is the development of an open government agenda, a second plan, in a political context of elections. The role of the working table of Jalisco, well, they face this challenge of not politicizing the open government agenda, but leveraging these electoral conditions to include in the government public agenda the open government issues. So I guess this is a challenge faced by several governments, but for Jalisco, it will be a new scenario, a new setting, and it should be very agile and smart to develop an open government agenda and get out of the political agenda. Finally, La Libertad. I'm not going to repeat what my colleague said, in the sense that we should enhance participation and promote open government approach, not just within the offices that already are familiar with them, but others downward in the line, in the state machinery. And for the specific case of Peru, not just La Libertad, because it is in their own autonomous powers to say which areas they will discuss, but in Peru, it was a difficult year because of El Niño phenomenon, which cost billions of dollars, but opens a window of opportunity to work issues in an articulated manner. In the region of Pibia, people, for instance, are complaining because the bridge that was built last year has now collapsed, and people now want to get involved. Accountability, certainly, in a macro context. But again, this is something that civil society and the state should determine based on their own priorities. Thank you. Thank you for all your contributions, all valuable, and reflecting an ongoing process, implementation of open government strategies at a local level. As many of you had said, the documents of analysis of progress of each projects are available in the Open Government Initiative platform, as well as the commitments that the citizens of national states have decided to implement. If you're not familiar with them, let me urge you to visit the website and read them, because the stake the OGP is making for the local subnational open government phenomenon is very relevant and involves other structural debate, such as the renovation of the trust of citizens on government. So congratulations to you all for your work, and thank you for sharing your experiences.